Okay, so just a quick fun one today on booting Docker without having to use Docker Desktop. I'm on Mac OS Ventura 13.0. So instead of using Docker Desktop, we obviously have to run a VM since Docker only runs on Linux and I'm running Mac OS. So if you're on Mac as well, um, I'll post this in the description. You have to install Hyperkit and Minikube. Minikube is kind of like a virtualization layer for running Kubernetes. And finally, Docker and Docker Compose. So I've already done that part. If you've never used Minikube before, you kick it off with a Minikube start. One thing you might have to do is expanding the memory available for it. You can do that by doing Minikube config set the name of the variable and then the size that you want. For me, I have a pretty big Docker Compose, which I'm going to be running on this. So I've given it 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of memory and 100 gigs of disk size. And the driver Hyperkit will be automatic. So you can find all kinds of things on that. The next part that you'll have to do is getting the Minikube IP into your Docker local. So when you have brew install Docker, that's installing that onto your Mac OS machine. And Minikube was going to be running actually in a Hyperkit VM running Linux. So the important line here is this echo Minikube IP. So your Minikube IP is the IP on your machine of the hypervisor that's running. So you need to put that into your etc hosts. So for me, this is basically saying anytime something makes a request to Docker local, redirect it into Minikube, which is where your containers will be running. So that part's important. Secondly, Minikube provides this script, which will also point when I'm looking at like Docker images or Docker containers. We don't want that to be looking on my local machine. We want that to be looking into Minikube itself. So this eval docker env basically just puts a bunch of different Docker environment variables into your local machine so that you're able to point it to the correct place. So you can see here, like it's pointing to the Minikube IP for things like the Docker host on port 2376 and also all the certs. So to recap what we've done thus far, installing Minikube, Hyperkit, Docker, and Docker Compose, starting up Minikube, configuring it with enough memory if you have something very big, and finally pointing all the networking to the right place. So you would think you're done, but as with all things in comp sci, you're not, or DevOps rather. So let me go ahead now that I've done all of this, and try to boot this Docker Compose. Basically, it just boots a local Ethereum client or local Ethereum network and deploys some contracts to it. So if I try and do a Docker Compose here using a boot script, same thing, Docker Compose, we'll see something goes wrong, and then we'll see how to fix the thing that goes wrong. So this right now, it's the logs from the Docker that's running within Minikube. So the Ethereum node is launched, and we see couldn't find package.json file in app. So here in the Docker Compose, I have that volume. And you would think, of course, that I'm mounting that volume and all is well, but it's actually not, because this container is looking for a thing called OpenQ contracts within the virtual machine, not within my own machine. So what I actually have to do here is a second step involving volume mounting into Minikube. So I'm going to mount my entire home directory into the hypervisor VM. So as you can see here, the way that you can do that is doing Minikube mount your home directory and then into whatever you want to call it here. So in my case, I want everything to be essentially the same between the two. So I'm going to mount home, which, by the way, home is just going to be your current user. So I'm going to Minikube mount home into home. So you can see that it successfully mounted user's ALO into that. Unfortunately, this process has to stay alive when you're running it, but this will at least fix the problem that we experienced here where it was unable to find the proper file, one step closer to recreating Docker Desktop without needing Docker Desktop. So we see this time around, yarn successfully finds the package JSON because we have mounted our home directory into the hypervisor.